Welcome to Living in Fiction. I am your host, Arthur Aguirre. I'm a professor in leadership and communication. Living in Fiction is an edutainment podcast where we look at some of the best movies, some of our favorite movies, and some ridiculous movies to see what we've learned to avoid, and what's inspired us. I am continuing my rewatch of The Bear. We are on season 3, episode 2. I don't have a whole lot for this episode, but the things I want to or the main thing I want to talk about is really important, and it's basically a through line for the entire season. So I was excited to jump on and talk about this. So let's get into it. On this episode titled Next, Carmen creates new rules at the Bear, including new menu every day because of everything that happened at the end of season 2. The crew reacts to all of the new status quo under Carmen's new rules while navigating the remaining tensions between Carmen and Richie, and the team supports Marcus after the loss of his mother. So a couple things stand out to me on this. One, we could see the dynamic between Carmen, Sydney, and Nat really meld together really well in season 2. It seems like they were on the same page. Towards the end, then Richie was running front of house, and it just seemed like they had a really great dynamic. And there was a collaborative approach to things that was going on. And after one really bad night for Carmen, where everyone else was able to rally and put things together, but he wasn't, he's just thrown it all away. It is now his way of doing things. At one point when Sydney comes in and sees that he's basically changed the entire menu, and in his mind, he's not changing the whole menu. He's making it better with some slight improvements and some subtractions and pushing it, right? But at one point, she asked him, like, why do you want to change things every day, change the menu every day? And he says, so they can see what we're capable of. And Sydney says, who's they? And he's basically changed their purpose. It is no longer what they want to do. And he even gets a little manipulative with Sydney, and he says, you're the one that wants to star, right? And it allows him to justify all of these new rules and non-negotiables and things that he wants to do to make the Bear what it is. But you immediately know in this second episode, after we just saw in the first episode this buildup of seeing all these different chefs that influence him for better or for worse, you can tell that those are the they he's talking about when he wants to show them what they're capable of. And that's important. I've talked multiple times over these last few episodes of how important purpose is in terms of giving your people purpose. But if you've started this new thing and it's built around a particular purpose that everyone has jumped on board with, and you change that, it just makes things all the more difficult. So that was one of the first things that stuck out to me. But the biggest thing, and like I said, the thing that is the through line for this whole season, is this mixing of the personal with the professional that's going on with Richie and Carmen. It is a big problem. I'm sure a lot of us have been in situations where we work with a friend, possibly if you work in a family business, you know what it's like to work with a family member, and it gets messy. Even, I teach a number of courses, and I teach in leadership programs. I've taught in communication departments. And when you teach these things, even when it comes to something like conflict, which is happening all the time on this show, even the way we handle conflict is slightly different when I'm teaching it, right? So let me show you. Professionally, when I'm teaching a leadership course and I'm going over how to handle conflict, this is the approach, or these are some of the common hallmark approaches people use, right? Avoiding, competing, accommodating, compromising, and then you hope people get to collaborating. In fact, I believe I've gone over this previously on another episode. Interpersonally, things get a little bit different. I mean, almost all of them are the same. We have avoidance, accommodation, competition, and collaboration. But with interpersonal relationships, we have reactivity, and that's what's going on here. Reactivity is communicating in an emotionally explosive and negative fashion. That typically isn't the case in a professional setting because the context and the environment's a little bit different. I'm sure we all have had someone that we worked with that was just an emotional, angry, reactive person. And, it leads to a toxic work environment. But for the most part, people understand that at the workplace, There's a little bit of a facade you have to put up. You can't be your full entire self. You have to understand that you have to be professional with the people that you're working with. Once family's involved, that gets really muddy. And we're seeing that between Richie and Carmen. And even though, in Carmen's eyes, he feels like he's apologized, clearly that was not enough for Richie. Richie did not hear what he needed to hear. You can tell that Richie took even though it was an emotional outburst from both of them, one, he is not taking accountability for what he said to Carmen, when he called him Donna. That was a really tough blow. And he said that he does something similar when he mentioned something about Claire to Carmen in this episode. But what he is doing is taking what Carmen said, not necessarily not at face value, but he's not holding it he's basically saying this is not enough. We should have had a face-to-face conversation or whatever it might be. But that schism between these two individuals, it is ruining the dynamic of the restaurant. You see it kind of play out if you've seen the entire season already, where the dynamic between front of house and the kitchen staff is just not there anymore. And that's what is important when you're putting together. If you think about in season 2 on episode 7, when Richie is working at Ever, that relationship is so strong between front of house and the kitchen and making things work. And so it makes sense why it's now causing such a problem when they're not on the same page. The other reason why it's so important to understand why this is such a strong dynamic or something to consider when it comes to a workplace dynamic is something called emotional contagion. I'm sure we've all been in those situations where the mood's pretty great. Someone walks in and they're just upset, they're sad, whatever, and it just changes the entire feel of that room. And it's not just a feeling. There are studies. In fact, here's a study. I've used it for a number of courses. It's almost 20 years old. And there's been a ton of studies since then, but I like using this one because it's particularly about leadership. It's a study by Sai, Cote, and Saavedra. It highlights the effect of a leader's mood on group members, right? And this is from their abstract, because we're not going to get into the entire article. But on the basis of a mood contagion model, the authors found that when leaders were in a positive mood in comparison to a negative mood, individual group members experienced more positive and less negative mood, and groups had a more positive and a less negative affective tone. The authors also found that groups with leaders in a positive mood exhibited more coordination and expended less effort than did groups with leaders in a negative mood. So I know a lot of us think that we can get to work, get all our emotions, positive or negative, leave them at the door, get our job done, and we're good. But that's just not the case. There's tons of studies that prove that is not the case. We take that wherever we go, and it affects the people that we work with. And we're seeing that play out in real time, where everyone is now trying to get involved and calming the tensions here. And that is just not a way of running a business or working with a team. So those are my two big takeaways from this episode. Thank you for joining me. Come back next week. I'll be going over episode 3 of season 3. And please subscribe, share with whoever you can. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next week.